So it doesn't really matter which topic you want to work on in a therapy context, the pattern is usually pretty similar. I want to share that one with you because it also helps you to understand what therapy is about. So, a couple of examples. There's always a pain point, for example, procrastination. The interesting thing is that it might be not most valuable to just push through that and build habits and set goals, but to actually take a deeper look. And usually you will find that below every pain point, there's some sort of wound. The word trauma is just Greek and means wound. That's the translation. We, for example, notice, you had super critical parents in your childhood. And for a child, of course, that's very painful if you constantly get criticized and you constantly feel like you're not good enough. As a child, anyway, you tend to be narcissistic in this way that you always feel like this is because of me. My parents got divorced, or maybe that's because of me. I'm always being criticized, or maybe they're right, this is about me, I'm not good enough. And though human beings are very smart and competent, you come up with a coping strategy. It's basically a solution attempt. And you maybe internalize this huge perfectionist. The idea is that you criticize yourself first before others can, right? You constantly get criticized. You're like, I can't do this anymore. I'm not good enough. I have to improve. I have to be better. So then you set yourself high standards. Maybe I criticize myself first. So then my parents and anybody else is not criticizing me anymore. And since it was such a painful experience and you are really dependent on the love of your parents, literally, otherwise you would die if you wouldn't have them, right? So this is very important. And that's why you come up with this perfectionist side. Though there are always side effects. And the side effect in this way is procrastination. Why? Because you put so much pressure on you all the time. This is so difficult. This is so stressful to constantly be a perfectionist and set those high standards that at some point you find a way to just procrastinate and relieve a little bit of the stress once in a while. And maybe this procrastination becomes even a much bigger thing. And that's a side effect, which is basically, again, the pain point here, why you're in therapy. Another example, anxiety. Wound might be, again, just an example, also critical parents. I deliberately choose the same example here because I want you to see that same childhoods or same wounds can lead to different symptoms. And also the other way around. You can have same side effects and same symptoms, but they're actually originating in different ways. But here is an example. Again, your parents been super critical and you just noticed, I always got to be alert. I always trying to prevent judgment and rejection. And that's why you're just in this hyper alert state all the time. And that's a way, of course, to also prevent any criticism. But also the side effect here is that you burn out. Because in your job, you do the same. You're always hyper alert, always try to do it right. And you're tired because of that. Maybe you already have a high blood pressure. And maybe that's why you start going to therapy, saying, I'm like an anxious person, or I feel like I'm depressed, but there's not really a reason. But again, you take a closer look, you notice there's a wound, and you're trying to cope with that. Now, an interesting thing is that often in therapy, people want action steps. What do I have to do now? I have to do it right. And sometimes that is very valuable, but you have to understand as a therapist, maybe my client is just using the coping strategy here, just being a perfectionist, doing it right all the time. And now he goes to therapy or she wants to do it right again in therapy. And what are the steps I need to do it correctly to let go of my perfectionism or whatever? And then just giving people action steps, it's actually counterproductive because you just push their coping strategy, which is actually leading them in the exact same direction where they're coming from, right? So here you got to be wise and maybe tackle though the wound, right? Because if the wound is healed, you don't have this need of this coping strategy anymore. Another interesting example is bulimia. I summarize it too simple, but just so you get it roughly. Basically, you have moments where you eat a lot and then you purge that. The wound here might be your parents have been divorced when you were like a child, maybe 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You stayed with your mom. She was very overwhelmed, cried a lot. As a coping strategy, you noticed, well, since back in the days, since the divorce, I did not talk about my emotions because I felt like I'm already a burden and my mom is struggling so much. I have to stay rational and strong to stabilize my mom, which is great because you're stabilizing the family. In some way, this was probably also the best way to receive love because your mom was emotionally receptive when you were there with her and stabilized her, and not when you're also struggling because she's overwhelmed with that. And also on top of that, you learned, well, I always need to not show emotions, but I need to let them out as well. So you started to use that throwing up strategy to regulate your emotions. And the idea really here is that back in the days when you were a child, you've been overwhelmed. You don't know much about life. You don't know much about emotion regulation. So probably this coping strategy was the best strategy you had back in the days. And the problem just is that you use that still until today. Now you're an adult. You still feel maybe guilty for the divorce. You feel guilty for your own emotions generally. Also physical health is a thing, when you purge a lot, some side effects come with that. And maybe you do have even relationship issues because you avoid showing emotions, you don't want to be a burden, and this unfolds in your current life as well. And you haven't noticed that yet, that you're an adult now. You can develop new strategies, but you just stick with the old one, which was a solution attempt back in the days, but it comes with a lot of side effects. And that's what we're working on, and the side effects are basically the pain point, why we are in therapy. So the important point is always there's a wound and you tried to cope with that. But this coping strategy has some side effects, and that's where the suffering is coming from. Last example, self-esteem. Let's take a similar example again. Maybe your mom has just been depressed generally. Maybe your parents are still together. Your dad worked a lot, but your mom was very present, but very depressed. And you noticed, I care for her all the time. That makes me feel more connected to her because she's just lying in bed all day long. She's not really connecting with me, but I can connect with her by caring a lot. And as a side effect, well, you inhibit your own desires. You become a people pleaser. And again, as a child, you tend to be narcissistic, thinking, oh, my mom is depressed. Maybe that's because of me, right? So this word narcissism, I use this in a different context here. It's just a bit self-centered, which is normal. A child is like that. They think, oh, maybe I am the burden here. Maybe my mom is depressed because of me. I need to be more pleasing and show less of my own desires. And nowadays you're a people pleaser. And you feel unhappy about that. Maybe you feel even depressed about that. But for sure there are some self-esteem issues going on. Let's talk about some specific examples how to resolve that. As an example, I love to use the strategy and the tool of chair work. So basically the idea is that you have different parts within you. Maybe this wound that you're having is still this little child that feels lonely and actually depressed. But then you have another side within you, which is this coping strategy. Well, I gotta be strong, I gotta be a perfectionist, for example, all the time. And even clients share with you this inner conflict that they're having, that maybe they're lazy and tired, but then they're very hard on themselves and they're pushing themselves all the time and they're not very nice to themselves. And then we actually set up 2 chairs and people start actually having a conversation with themselves. Maybe they sit on the perfectionist side and then they say, well, I feel good here, I feel great. This is the problem over there. Okay, interesting. Can you tell that this side? We do like a little role play and they say, oh no, this is weird. Can you nevertheless do it? Then you turn around and say, you're the problem, I don't like you, please leave my life. Then they switch the chair to this depressed, tired side, the lonely side. And then they say, well, maybe they don't get angry at all. Maybe over time they get angry and say, well, what are you doing? Like, we're the same team and my feelings are real. Why are you always putting me down, right? And then an interesting discussion comes up and basically the idea is to integrate all sides. Another idea and tool I love to use is inner child work. Because over time, when we notice those patterns, I love to also talk about specific examples. Because if you talk about specific examples in their life, also emotions get evoked. You don't just want to talk big picture. And maybe there is this representative example of I was 9, I was crying in my room, my mom opened the door and she just shouted at me again and left, and I was sitting there alone, and this was basically really very painful. And we noticed maybe that's just a representative example of what happened, this wound. And then we actually do a visualization. We visualize, you actually go back in time, go to that house or apartment, open the main door, go up the stairs, open your room, and you see that little child there. You walk up to that, give that child a hug, you tell that child what that child needs to hear and what nobody told that child back then, but somebody should have. And you say that out loud. And then you give that child what it needs. Maybe you go out and play a little bit. Maybe you actually go downstairs and talk to the mother in your visualization saying, hey, you're neglecting this child, whatever. But the idea is you're meeting your wounded place with compassion. Healing comes when you meet your wounded place with compassion. You meet that place, you go there, you see that painful child there that suffers, and you meet it with compassion. You hug it and you tell her what he or she needs to hear. That's often also, how this healing simply comes, and then you just, in a relaxed way, don't have this need anymore to use that coping strategy, maybe this perfectionist side, or maybe being depressed or anxious, or even like suffering from bulimia or whatever it is, right? It falls away naturally. You don't need to push this away. I have to learn how to be nicer. No, we gotta actually just understand where this is coming from and heal from that. Though I want to share, sometimes confrontation is also a very good thing. Again, with perfectionism, if people, maybe they go through a depressive episode, but they still have like super high standards. They say, I need to perform at this level. Well, then I tell them, well, if you want to run a marathon and you broke your leg, you're not going to say, well, I need to keep running and finish this marathon. You notice I need a break for a couple of months and retreat. Now, you're going through this phase right now, but you still have your standards up here. That's the same. You are stubborn, I feel like. And that also often resonates with clients. Now, you don't just always do that. You just see a little bit what the client needs. And it's also very important that you don't share this out of anger as a therapist. You share this out of love, but we'll talk about this later in this video. But confrontation sometimes can be also very helpful, and it makes people understand, like, oh, true, like he's right. Nobody shared it that way. And then we can start working maybe on the inner child work and the chair work. And confrontation can be also very powerful. Sometimes I even like to invite people. Maybe we talked about the mother or the father. Maybe we cried over this again and started understanding patterns already. And then suddenly the rubber meets the road and we say, great, let's invite your mom. Let's talk about this together. Often great change happens just within a session by calling things out we never did, being very understanding why the mother acted back in the days, because she had also a very good reason and she also had a childhood that shaped herself, and just nurturing understanding and connectedness can be very powerful. I often do this even with entrepreneurs. They invite their mom and their dad, and this improves their business at the end of the day. Yeah, and there are many more tools. I don't want to bore you with that. Over time, I get less and less tool-oriented. And I notice really it's just more about the space we create and the things we share. Sometimes having this tool and saying, now we do this visualization or now we do this exercise. Sometimes I feel like coaches and therapists are doing this because they need clarity and okay, this is the clarity of the session, we do that. But sometimes you need to be okay with feeling helpless and not knowing the patterns and just allowing the session to evolve. And then at the right time, you can have a couple of tools, a couple of exercises, and yeah, that might be the most fruitful thing. And there are many more exercises, but just sharing them and sharing the big picture is not as helpful as actually going to coaching and therapy in this context here, and experiencing it yourself by having a clear topic. And then at the right time, there's the right tool that evokes emotions, that evokes insight, and it's not as powerful to just summarize it. So that's just a little big picture right here, and let's move on to the next chapter.